I'm kind of excited to be here, a little nervous. I grew up in the church. It was a small denominational church that my dad was a pastor of, so I grew up a preacher's kid, and it had its own dynamic to it. And then when just before I was in junior high, he decided to not preach anymore and go back to school. And so we started going to an Advent Christian church. And at that church, I got to be a part of their youth group and their weekend services and Sunday school. And so I got heavily involved in that with them. But it was kind of like a Wednesday night, Sunday morning thing, where then during the week, I was just kind of doing whatever I wanted. So there was a little bit of a duality going on during my junior high and high school years. But it was my time with them that I was introduced to Teen Missions International. And I actually got to go to Australia on a missions trip with them between my junior and senior year of high school. And so I spent 2 months over there, and it was life-changing. It was fantastic. Nothing I ever thought in a million years I'd get to do. And so I came home, and I was on fire. I really just loved the Lord, and my faith had grown. I was ready to set aside this duality that I was struggling with before I had left, and just really dove into my faith. And it was my senior year in high school, so I had to start searching for colleges. And I was an art major. I wanted to be an art major with an emphasis in jewelry at a Christian school, which is very narrow in scope. And so, but I found a school, and it was in Texas, and I just knew that's where God was calling me to go. And so when my mother would be like, "Do you have a second plan? Like, what are you going to do if you don't have the money?" I was like, no. I was like, if God can get me halfway around the world to Australia, he can get me to Texas. Only that wasn't God's plan for me. And I didn't get the money, and I didn't get to go. And I wasn't as strong as I thought I was in my faith. And I got really angry. I felt betrayed. I felt like God let me down, and I was really mad at him, and I basically just walked away. And I was done. Like, I didn't want anything to do with it anymore. My friends at the time could tell you, like, it was a complete 180 from who I was to who I became. And I started making choices that weren't so great. A couple months after graduation, I also had a really close friend of mine die in a car accident. And I think between those two events, it just kind of sent me on a spiral of not really caring a whole lot. And it started, I started smoking pot at that time, and that kind of led into just relationships that weren't healthy. I ended up in a romantic relationship with a guy, and I thought I was doing good, only it turned out to be really toxic. It turned out to be really abusive. Getting out of that relationship landed me on the wrong side of the law. And it was not, I had made a mess of things. And you would think that having made that kind of a mess and having a safe place to land back at my parents' home, I would get my act together and I would get back to my faith. But that wasn't the case. Instead, I did the exact opposite, and I started making even worse decisions for myself, and I started going clubbing with my new friends. I started doing the drugs that went along with that. There was a very promiscuous season for me, and just a lot of damaging choices that I made during that time. And it just wasn't good. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't what my parents wanted, that was for sure. I caused a lot of damage to our relationships with them. During that season, I was able to hold down a job during the week. Most of my activities took place on the weekends. And it was through one of these jobs that God just kind of started to bring me back. I was working at a customer service rep in a hair color distribution company. And there was an opportunity for me to get into some outside sales and get out of the office. And I had already been making poor decisions with the gentleman in the warehouse, so I really wanted to get out of that office. And so I took the sales job. And so I was out of the office, away from all my coworkers. I was away from all my friends. It was just me in my car. And, I had a huge territory, so I was driving a lot. And I was flipping through the radio stations, and I came across K-Love. And I hadn't heard Christian music in a decade at this point. And they were playing like all these songs from my childhood. Old Michael W. Smith songs, like songs I recognized, and I just left it there. Like I just left it on that station, and I just listened for days and weeks and months. I just listened to the lyrics of all those songs, and it started to make an impact. And it was also during this time I found out I wasn't a very good sales rep, and I was struggling really hard to meet the goals and the requirements that my company had for me. And so I would call my mom, and I would say, I would lament to her, and just she'd be like, "What do you need? What do you need to sell today? How much money do you need to make today? What is it that you need?" And I would tell her, and she'd, "Okay, I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to pray that you get that today." "Okay, Mom." And I just didn't want to hear it. Like it made me ashamed and uncomfortable to hear anything like that. But that's what she did. And that woman prayed. And wouldn't you know it, God just answered all those prayers of hers. And I would get the product sold, and I would get the money that I needed. And it kind of got to the point where it was just really undeniable that God was making his move for me. And so I had this battle going on inside because I'm stubborn and I wasn't ready, and God was making himself really known in undeniable ways, and I didn't want to listen. And so I once again made very uncomfortable, toxic, and unhealthy decisions for myself, and I landed myself in another horrible relationship. I didn't know what the term gaslighting was at the time. I do now, and that was definitely a lot of what was taking place in that relationship. There was a lot of me enabling his bad habits and drug abuse, and I just, once again, found myself in this really messy situation that wasn't good for me and wasn't good for the people that loved me. There was one night where I was on the phone with my mom, and I was having this conversation because I had this opportunity to go back into the office and get out of sales because I wasn't doing a good job, and make more money in customer service again. And the guy I was dating at the time didn't want me to do that because he knew the history that I had had in the office, and I was mad that I had made such a mess of everything. I couldn't do what I knew was what was best for me, and I was upset about it. And I had parked in a parking lot at the college nearby where I lived to have this conversation with my mother. And I can't really tell you what her and I talked about specifically. I knew that was the subject, but I can't remember her words to me or anything like that. But I remember pulling away, and I remember I was parked at a stoplight waiting for the light to turn green. And I just looked out my windshield, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I've made a mess of everything, and I can't do it. You've got to take it. You've got to take it, and you've got to fix it. Because I can't. It's obvious. And the light turned green, and I went home. And I walked in, and the first thing my boyfriend said to me was, "I'm moving out." And I didn't fall to the floor, but you couldn't blame me. And I just looked at him and I said, "Okay." And I have never felt such peace about something. I've never had a prayer answered so quickly and so obviously. And he didn't exactly expect that response from me, because then he spent the next 3 days trying to get me to keep him. And I was like, "No, I'm sorry." I knew who had answered my prayer, and I knew who was cleaning up my mess. And by golly, I was going to get out of the way. And so, when you're living with somebody and you break up, there's a whole web of things that you have to untangle. And so it took some time for us to untangle that, but I stuck to it. I made him move out. I changed the locks on the apartment. I got him off the lease. And I was alone. And that was hard. I had my family. My parents lived close by. My sister lived close by, but I was alone. And I still had this ache in my heart that said I wanted to be in a relationship, but I couldn't do that. I obviously was not making the right choices for myself. And so I remembered a verse. It's in Psalm 37:4. It says, "Delight thyself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." And I said, "All right, God, right now my heart aches because this is something that I want. And so you promised that if I delight myself in you, you'll give me my heart's desires. So my heart's desire is to be in a relationship. If that's not the right desire for me, then you have to change my heart, or you have to make good on your promise. But in the meantime, I will commit to you and you alone. And I will focus on my relationship with you." So that's what I did. I started sneaking my way back to church. I would not tell my parents. And I went to a church a few towns away where I had gone when I was in junior high before we had switched. And I kind of just kept it on the down low because I just couldn't handle that conversation with them yet. And I was at my mom and dad's one day when my sister was over, and my mom was telling my sister about this there was a mega church a few towns over, and they were opening a brand new satellite campus in our town. And my mom's like, "Oh, you should go," not to me, to my sister, you should go check them out. And my sister, "Yeah, maybe." And I was like, "I want to go to that place." And so I called up my sister and I told her, I said, "Hey, I want to go to that church, but you cannot tell Mom and Dad. I want to go. I want you to go with me. And I need to go, but I can't tell Mom and Dad yet because I'm just trying to figure this out. Like, I'm trying to figure it out on my own, and I can't handle their words yet." And she's like, "Okay." And so her and her husband and their son and I, every Sunday morning we would go. And the first Sunday, they were talking about this women's group, and they were talking about what they were studying over the summer. And I don't know what got into me, but I thought, I'm going to that, and it's starting tomorrow. And so I picked up the book during the day, and I went that night, and I just showed up. And those women were so gracious, and they were so loving. But it was awkward for me because they were all married. They all had kids. They seemed to have it all together. And I was coming from this really, everything in my history was very fresh, and I just didn't know what to do with it. And so it was fun to spend the summer with them. But then in the fall, I joined a singles 20-something co-ed group. And I, looked them up on the church's website, and I emailed the girl, and she's like, "Yeah, we meet at my house this time, this place." I was like, "Oh, is that your house?" okay. So I sucked it up and I went, and her name was Laura Breeden, and her co-leader was Sam Thomas. And this was about 2005-ish, I think it was the fall of 2005. And it had been about a year or so since I had made that, what I call my windshield commitment to God, recommitment, I suppose. And so I went to this group and I met these two leaders, and I started getting heavily involved, and Sam worked at the church part-time and then full-time, and he became our group liaison, and I was talking to him all the time because I was planning events, and so we had to know all the church's policies. And eventually those talks became less business, more personal. And in the spring of 2007, Sam and I started dating, and God answered my prayer. So Sam and I we're gonna celebrate our 14-year marriage this fall. We have 6 amazing children. It's been crazy. It's been crazy. And I think about that time and those years of making all the toxic decisions and harmful choices that I've made. And it took me I told Sam, but I told nobody. Like, my family knew, and some of the people that I knew when I was going through that, but I told nobody that stuff for years. And as I got to be in a healthier place, I started thinking, like, God's in the business of redemption. Like, when's he going to start using that stuff? Like, I got stuff. And then I had gone through a season of depression, and I was seeing a counselor at the time, and she even helped me put that season in perspective compared to the seasons that I've had now, and how big the season of my life and since then is so much greater than that time period. And it started to peel away that guilt and shame that I was feeling, going, I committed to God, and He really was faithful to me. And I came out of that counseling season with a phrase, which is why I'm here before you tonight. My phrase is, God can't use an untold story. And so if you want redemption, if you want God to redeem your story, you've got to be willing to tell it. And the thing that I learned as I molded my story over the years is that my story's really not about me. Like, if I look at it through the choices I made and the bad decisions and the toxic behavior I had and the way I hurt people and the pain I caused, you'll never want to tell your story, because that's just full of a bunch of shame. But if I look at it through what God did and the pursuit He had in isolating me and putting things into place and answering prayers, and if I look at it through the protection He had during all those toxic things I did that I should have not survived, or I look at it in the provision that He's given me through my family and my husband and just everything, that's the story that needs to be told of what God did. And so as I've practiced my story, this sounds nothing like the practice that I really did. But as I practiced my story, that was really the takeaway that I wanted to encourage you guys as you think about your stories and you think about the things you've done, past, present, whatever's going on with you. God can use it. No matter how ugly it may seem to you, God can use it. And the only way He can use it is if you tell it. because it's in the telling of what he's done that the healing happens, the encouragement happens, the redemption happens. So that's my story, and I thank you for letting me tell it.